So we wanted to say, thank you for declaring the to the province of New Brunswick and to University of New Brunswick for declaring September the 7th to the 11th as a Respectful Workplace Week. We'd like to thank and acknowledge the following financial contributor, WorkSafe New Brunswick. We would like to thank and acknowledge the province of New Brunswick for their financial contribution. We would like to thank and acknowledge the University of New Brunswick for their financial contribution. We would like to thank and acknowledge Dave Kelly and Associates for their financial contribution. And we would like to thank and acknowledge the following in-kind contributor, Nicole Smith. She is with conflict management, and I think that most of the presenters and probably almost everybody on today would have seen her name in at least the invitations, and probably the presenters have had a fair amount of discussion with her. So we thank Nicole for all of her assistance. So first, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is a traditional, unceded territory of the Wolastoqey, Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq peoples. This territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which Wolastoqey, Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqey, Maliseet title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. So just to begin with, I want to talk a little bit about the Zoom. We would like everybody to remain muted because any background noise whatsoever really interferes with the ability for other people to hear. You can turn your videos off if you like. Sometimes it will help your bandwidth. If you don't have any problem with bandwidth, and perhaps you want to stay on the video as well. I'd like my panelists to all stay on, by the way. If you want to ask a question, there is a chat box in the bottom of the screen, and if you can either send a chat to everyone, or you can send a chat to people individually. You can send one to me individually, and I will put your questions forward to the panel at certain points. So I'd like to welcome you to our 8th annual Respectful Workplace event. I can't believe that we've been around for 8 years. My name is Brenda Moore, and I am a Learning and Performance Management Advisor with the Department of National Defense at CFB Gagetown. I have been with the Workplace Violence and Abuse team for quite some time, and I am really pleased to welcome you on behalf of the team. The Workplace Violence and Abuse Research Team is a volunteer team of the Muriel McQueen Ferguson Center for Family Violence Research. Our aim is to understand, prevent, and address issues of workplace violence and abuse. A major strength of the team is that it is comprised of academic, professional, government, and community members who are passionate about this issue. For 14 years, our team has worked with the province of New Brunswick to have the week of Labor Day declared as Respectful Workplace Week. I want to note that this has not been possible this year because of the call of the election. However, this year, as in years past, declarations in support of Respectful Workplace Week have been made by the City of Fredericton, the University of New Brunswick, and other organizations. Over the past 8 years, we have seen our annual event grow tremendously. In our first year, we had a single presentation that was attended by 12 people. This year, hundreds of people have registered for our webinar series. Today, so far, we have 106 participants. So I think that this speaks to the relevance and the importance of the topics in our social context. And this is why this year's theme is the evolving workplace. We are very thankful and to our financial and in-kind contributors who have made this event possible. We would like again to acknowledge WorkSafe New Brunswick, Government of New Brunswick's Treasury Board, the Women's Equality Branch, and PEDAL. We would like to also acknowledge UNB's Human Resources Department, Dave Kelly and Associates. Because of their financial support, we are able to keep this a no-cost event for participants, which is really important. We'd also like to thank our interpreters today, and of course today's speakers, Chris Brooks, Angela Chen, and Mary McCarthy-Brandt. So without any more ado, I'm going to introduce Angela Chen, and I will give her a chance to talk about systemic racism in the workplace today. So Angela started working with the Human Rights and Positive Environment Office at UNB in February this year. As the case resolution advisor, her main function is to advise members of the university community on complaints of discrimination and harassment. Prior to joining UNB, Angela practiced as a commercial lawyer in Sydney, Australia, where she was heavily engaged in pro bono legal work, including advising and representing clients from marginalized backgrounds. Angela was also seconded to the Human Rights Law Centre, an NGO, and made submissions to Australian parliamentary review committees on human rights implications of proposed legislation. Angela obtained a Bachelor of Arts, majoring in Government and International Relations, and a Bachelor of Laws from the University of Sydney. Angela's perspective on systemic discrimination are shaped by her professional experience, but also her personal experience as a woman of Chinese heritage from abroad. So Angela, would you like to talk about systemic racism in the workplace?
Thanks very much, Brenda, for that introduction, and also for inviting me here to speak. This is a wonderful opportunity to connect with a whole bunch of people from various different sectors, and it's so great to see so many people logged on this morning. As mentioned in my intro, my understanding of systemic discrimination in the systemic racism in the Canadian context and the New Brunswick workplace context is from an outsider. And it's been really interesting to see how it's playing out as we're responding to big things that are happening in the world, in our communities, what we're seeing in the States, but what we're seeing in the New Brunswick community in terms of anti-Black racism and Indigenous racism matters. In terms of the workplace, I guess people think that, okay, why are we focused on systemic racism in a place of work? What is an employer's responsibility in this space? There's a myth that it's larger than what happens in the confines of an 8-to-4 work environment. But we spend so much time at work. It forms a large part of our relationships. It also forms a large part of our mental health and security in terms of it being a source of financial stability for us. That alone speaks to the broader implications that systemic racism or specific racism that shows up in the workplace plays out for members of the community. Unfortunately, we're seeing that this knowledge or this enlightenment that systemic racism exists is coming only to us in 2020. And that just speaks to this theme of the Respectful Workplace Week, that it is an evolution, that we are all constantly learning. That doesn't mean that we've reached our goal. In the context, a few other sort of things when I was thinking about this, you know, there's an impression that systemic racism is one size fits all and it's the same for everyone. That's not true. It plays out in a far more pervasive manner with the Black community and the Indigenous community. So my experience as a Chinese woman doesn't translate. And that's really important to note. And then the other thing is that it's different within the communities as well. And we see levels of intersectionality where people are part of other groups. For example, people with a disability, with family status considerations, they may overlap with language barriers, religious and cultural practices as well. So in terms of how systemic discrimination and racism plays out, it's not just a question of getting a job. Of course, we're seeing that Black and Indigenous Canadians are experiencing a higher rate of unemployment than non-racialized individuals. But there's also a question of treatment within the workplace. And it's important to note that our Human Rights Act in New Brunswick recognises discrimination in both those forms and recognises that employers, as part of occupational health and safety legislation, have an obligation to maintain an environment that is free of harassment. So those are my general observations about systemic racism, but I'm really eager to hear from Mary and Chris about their experiences because they are locals here. They are of different racialized groups than myself. And it's so wonderful that this panel is so diverse, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Angela. Our next speaker is Mary McCarthy-Brandt, and in 2011, she was wrongfully accused of shoplifting. She launched a human rights complaint against Shoppers Drug Mart, and she won. With lineage in Canada dating back to 1783, her passion is finding and cleaning up long forgotten segregated cemeteries. And that is the subject of her PhD. This is a part of the bio that was written for her for an article in which she is spotlighted in this month's Chatelaine. And I believe that it's on sale right now at newsstands near you. She was one of 33 Black women who were featured in the article for people tackling systemic racism. Mary, welcome.
Welcome. Everyone hear me?
Yes.
I don't really have a lot to say. I want to thank you for inviting me. As my bio states, I date back to the mid-1700s here in New Brunswick, so I am 6th generation. And yes, I was successful in a human rights case where I was wrongfully accused by another racialized person. The media doesn't include that, but I was accused by a Shoppers Drug Mart staff who was another person of color. She was South Asian. I am eager to get to the questions and the community that's logged on. I guess we're now up to about 112. I keep checking 113. So yeah, I'm trying to finish up a PhD. I am married to an international man who's in the US, and we're trying to, with the pandemic, try to work out our next chapter in our lives. And I've been in Fredericton. I've just come back from the US in March. And yeah, I'm eager to move on to the questions. I will say I'm a bit frustrated right now because I have been supporting a cousin of mine who's had extreme racism in the Carleton County School District, and I was denied attending a meeting with him yesterday. So does systemic racism exist in New Brunswick? These poor white men were intimidated by Five Foot Mary because I challenged them, and I was denied supporting my cousin in a staff meeting about his ongoing racism he's experienced from staff and students in the Carleton County area. So I am buzzing this morning. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say today.
Thank you very much, Mary. And Christopher Brooks is a Woolastook elder, a sacred pipe carrier, and sweat lodge conductor from St. Mary's community. He shares Indigenous knowledge, including traditional Aboriginal spirituality and ceremonies with all people. He is currently employed as a mental health and addictions worker within his community. He has completed the Child and Youth Care with Addictions Support Worker program at Eastern College, and he has a Bachelor of Arts in Criminology from St. Thomas University. For many years, he served as a corrections programs officer for Corrections Canada, ensuring that men and women had transformative opportunities for wellness. In his spare time, he is a trainer for the Outward Bound Canada Leadership Development Program. He's a firearms hunter safety instructor for the province of New Brunswick, and he holds the position of Vice President of the Turning Leaf Foundation, a John Howard Society affiliate. And Chris, I'm going to let you share your Aboriginal name because I didn't want to make a mistake with it.
It's pronounced Lupskahazit Jeeknuks, which translates into spotted turtle. That is a name that was given to me by my teacher many years ago, and I want to acknowledge him too. Also, Malsquit Harry Laporte. It's his anniversary of his passing here today, September 11th. So. You know, for people that didn't know Harry on a personal level, he helped a lot of our people to I guess step over that barrier of systemic racism, you know, and teach us that culture, being proud of who you are, you know, understanding other people's perspectives. And you know, promoting diversity when we go out to share what needs to be shared. You know, when we go out and teach and assist other people, our doors are always open. Nobody gets turned away, no matter if you're white, yellow, black, or red. You know, our Aboriginal door is always open to help people. And I like to just acknowledge, you know, my community of St. Mary's, Sedunskis, here on the north side of Fredericton. You know, given the fact that we are part of a marginalized group and have been ever since Europeans first came here in 1604, 1605, I don't know the exact date, but for the most part, we've been battling that systemic racism for hundreds of years. And I want to acknowledge you know, the suffering that still happens to this day in our territory and in our province. And I just want to thank everybody for giving me the opportunity to share here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. So I have a couple of questions already. So I'm going to ask the question and I would like each of you to respond to it. If you like, let me know if you don't want to. So the question was, or the comment, our workplace is very diverse in that we have representatives from 13 international nations and a few Indigenous nations within our team. I would like to believe that our workplace is not a fertile ground for racism, but know that systemic racism is often not clearly visible. I am interested in knowing if there are common operational and HR policy, procedure, or practices that you have identified. We'll start with Angela.
Sorry, it took me a moment to unmute. Thanks so much for that question. That's a really good one. I think it speaks to a few things. One is that we want to create a positive environment, and we hope that we are creating that inclusive environment, but it's also that recognition of knowing the unknown. Maybe there is something out there that we're not doing fully. I've found some really great resources online. There's a GBA Plus lens available on the Canadian government website. It's the Gender-Based Analysis Plus. It was first developed as a gender inclusivity in employment tool, but it speaks to broader groups as well, looking at race, looking at religion, looking at sexuality, other forms of inclusivity and diversity. So I found that to be a really interesting reading starting point when I was doing my research for this. But to really speak at a high level, I think what the question is asking is, you know, or what the question is showing is, one, awareness of not realizing that they don't really have a complete picture of what might be happening on the ground, which is fantastic. I think we should all be starting from a position of humility, of realizing that we don't necessarily know all the answers to the questions, and that we approach this with a task of curiosity and seeking answers. Secondly, sort of from a formal policy framework perspective, there are wonderful resources online. My suggestion is always that policy can, done well, reduces the scope for discrimination to take place. It sets the tone for an organisation in being very clear about its own values and expectations. The absence of policy creates a hole, essentially, and that might allow scope for discretion to take place, and inconsistency in approach, and internal personal biases coming out. And then the third aspect is like the cultural aspect of it. And what we see a lot in the equity, diversity, inclusivity professional community are workshops around cultural competence and unpacking unconscious bias. Mary, in your introduction, you were talking about how it was another racialized individual who made that allegation against you. And as a woman having grown up with a very conservative Chinese family, that doesn't surprise me at all. And it's deeply disappointing. And throughout my professional career, and also this year in particular, I have had to work really hard to unpack my own biases that have been programmed in me since my birth. So it's really important that, you know, we say, okay, we've got a wonderfully diverse workplace from the outside. We need to make sure that the employees are also adhering and living by those values. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much, Angela. Mary, would you like to respond?
I don't remember a lot of the question, but I think there was a question posed that the person was from a multi-diverse workplace and wondered about some HR policies. I guess I want to say that having had many, many years, I'm retired now, and having, 40 plus years of working, I did most of all my post-secondary education part-time while I worked. And then later I had my young son to support. So again, as I went through the master's and PhD level, I did it all part-time. It's very important when you are alone, as in Atlantic Canada, and specifically in New Brunswick. Assume all these questions are coming from New Brunswick because it is respectful workplace in New Brunswick. When you are in workplaces, you're always and sometimes and often the only one. So it's very, very hard when you have had incidences of systemic racism, which is a very, it's such a deep, violent attack on your personal psyche. And when you know you've been wronged, maybe there's been racist talk or stereotypical jokes or prejudgment or whatever, when you want to challenge and you need the support of HR, it's also another layer of otherism when you're looking at the dominant class, the white face, trying to get support by being wronged by another white person. So I think that I agree 100% with Angela that policies are very, very important, but also hiring practices need to reflect the body of the people that they're hiring. So in that particular diverse work site, I'm wondering what the HR department looks like, and if they are as well a blended, culturally diverse work HR department. I think that's very, very important. And I want to just say to Angela, I appreciate your honesty and vulnerability by recognizing that we do have prejudgments and that we are raised. I mean, my mother raised me to look the other way and to cross the street and not to disrupt or challenge any racism. I come from a family of 9. I was the middle child, surrounded by brothers. Even though there were 5 girls, I was kind of stuck between my brothers. And that didn't fly with me. I had to defend myself, and intellectually, I think I grew. So when I went into a work site, I had this very active mind, and I just said to my mother, I am so sorry, but I am not. You raised me to be proud of who I am and proud of the ground that I'm standing on. And no one gets to speak to me like that. And I mean, I grew up challenging. I spent high school in the principal's office. I remember I had a teacher from the US. I was in grade maybe 9 or 10, and he was a draft dodger, so to speak, you know, which is his choice. And I had an excuse to leave school. And I just said to him, I came for the exam, you know, my first class, but I had to go home. I wasn't feeling well. He said, you will not leave, and blah, 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 blah. And I just got up and walked out, and all the class cheered me, which he didn't like. So I was not even allowed back to school until I had to sit with the principal. So I guess that little example is I am not the typical turn the other cheek is the way I was raised. There is something inside me, and I believe it's my ancestral support. Like Chris had said, you know, the many, many generations of my family and the many, many multiple atrocities that they have experienced. So I believe from the spirit world, they are guiding me and giving me the tools to move on. I'm a bit off topic, I'm sorry, but I guess I just want to round up and say that policy is beautiful, but I think ground roots people who can relate to you and can support you and say that is wrong, and not say to you, oh, are you sure you didn't take it that way? Or are you playing the black card again, Mary? You know, like validate that I know from my own personal experience what is racist and what is prejudgment. So I will just close and say that in a diverse community, you need a diverse HR department to support everyone.
Thank you, Mary. Chris?
Yes, I'm just unmute my phone here. I just want to say that, you know, I spent 23 years of my life working for the federal government as within the context of the Correctional Service Canada. And I just want to say that, you know, I have witnessed and experienced systemic racism in the workplace. And it's not a pretty thing. It's something that, you know, sometimes makes you feel hopeless. You know, at the time when I was hired, I was in my workplace at the time, I was one of 5 Indigenous men who worked as a correctional officer. And there were, you know, policies in place, you know, for complaints. And I believe that is something that is very important as a guideline, as a tool for a person of color, you know, especially when they have situations or events that can and probably will transpire in the workplace. So I believe policies and procedures within the HR capacity is something that is very important. But you know, sometimes it's challenging for a minority, you know, because you're in the white privilege type of environment. If you do put in a complaint, sometimes you may be intimidated by your coworkers once they find out about it, and it's tough. It's tough to hold your head up proud when you see something, when you've been wronged, or you witness others who've been wronged, and you're there to try to support your fellow coworkers in a time of need. And it's you know, and looking back at things and you know, thinking about some of the things I've experienced and some of the things that I have witnessed, you know, do those policies work? You know, that's a good question. You know, if you have an employer who is you know, very adamant that, you know, they want to stop or control systemic racism in the workplace, it has to come from the employer too as well, and they have to be you know, I know the government of Canada is bound by many laws of the land, you know, especially in the workplace itself. So you know, having those good policies, and I guess people in HR who understand those policies and you know, trying to get more employment equity in the workplace, I think is something that is very important. And you know, getting that real good, you know, diversity, you know, in the workplace, especially with your fellow coworkers, sort of thing, right? So I believe that you know, they're put in place as a safety mechanism. They're put in place to assist employees when they're having difficulties with others, having difficulties with the employer itself. And you know, those safeguards are like safeguards, you know, especially when somebody you know, comes forward with a complaint. But at the same time, if a person does come forward with a complaint, they have to be prepared to you know, potentially deal with negative consequences from the system itself or from your fellow employees. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question. Good morning. I'm a police officer and have been paying close attention to the discourse around systemic racism in policing. I definitely believe it exists. I've had conversations with colleagues and my husband, who is also police, and when I try to explain what it means to other officers get very upset because they think they are being called racist as people. How can I have meaningful conversations about this issue? Do you have any suggestions? Do you want to start with Angela?
Sure. I think this is a really good question and on a lot of people's minds about what allyship, and I'm not in love with the term allyship, but what this looks like, what sort of personal activism could also look like. On a personal note, my partner is in the Canadian Armed Forces at Oromocto, and this is a situation that I found myself in socially from time to time as well. I guess the key thing that I try to do is differentiate the idea from the person. So what I try to do is call into question the assumptions that people are making when they're making a statement. And I sort of ask questions. Oh, I'm curious what you mean when you say people of color cause trouble. Like, what do you mean by that? Explain it to me. In that situation, what I'm trying to do is get the person I'm speaking to think really critically about what they're saying, how it's landing on me, and what assumptions are built into that. Sort of what are the observations that are unsaid but are plaguing their mind. That way I can address those niggling concerns that are buried deep down. And it's too often that conversations are sort of at this surface level that we're not really engaging with the deep down values. The other way that I do it, have these conversations, is to be really vulnerable and to be really open. So I treat it with a position of humility in the way that I've started this conversation today, in saying that I'm an outsider, that I have done a lot of work to unpack my own unconscious bias, to recognize that I can't speak for everyone, I can't speak for other racialized communities, and that I am still learning and I will always still be learning in this space. Using that tone helps in a way that's less confrontational. It shows that everyone is trying to work together in moving forward, and then tapping into the common values that we all adhere to. Respect, and recognizing people for their inherent dignity and worth, recognizing them for who they are and their personhood. If I can tap into those values with empathy and kindness, that's more likely to be able to bridge a conversation that is going to be values-based, rather than sort of arguing statistics that people might see on Facebook. I don't think that's a helpful way to engage in discussion. I always like to bring it down to a base level of human connectivity. And starting from that spot, we can then build on our own equity education from that.
Thank you, Angela. Mary, would you like to respond to that?
Well, thank you, Bobby Simmons Beauchamp, for the question. And I think it's very important when you have these discussions with your colleagues that you sort of lay down the boundaries or the parameter by saying, you know, this is just a discussion. I want to just give you some information. And I also believe that when you're preparing to discuss, you know, I'll call it hot topics or sensitive topics, that you yourself have to be, as Angela says, humble and have humility, and just be open and sometimes raw and say, you know, the reality is that you may not be aware of the systemic racism because of your privilege, of your white skin, and maybe not in those words. And some people, maybe men or women in the forces. I mean, I think this is a very, very sensitive question, because within the forces, or the police force especially, you need your colleagues to have your back. So you don't want to alienate them, and you want their support, but you also want them to be, I guess, cognizant of the reality of the hidden and systemic racism. I mean, in my previous work, again, I use myself as an example. I worked, you know, for multiple levels of government, mostly provincial and federal, provincial in Ontario, federal here. And I did frontline service, and I have had individuals who, you know, would not want to meet with me because of my color, because they assumed I was of lesser importance. I mean, that did not happen a lot, but it has happened. And I didn't need to negotiate with my manager or tell anyone. I knew, because of my own internal security system, I guess, that it was systemic, it was racism, and it was prejudice and prejudgment. So when we are othered, and we know we've been othered, the challenge is to package up our emotions and make a decision, perhaps remove ourselves from that situation. And we have to make a decision whether we're going to let it go, we're going to take it home and process, and maybe come back and talk to the workplace managers. I like what Chris said, because, you know, he made a very good point in that you know, the HR people and the managers may want just status quo. They don't want any type of ruptures or inflammation. And if you choose, or if you unfortunately have a manager like that, you're going to have a double challenge, because you're going to have the injury of having a racist incident, and you're going to have a double fight to validate that experience to a higher level of management. So, Bobby, I guess the biggest thing I would say to you is, try to be humble, try to say this is just a conversation. I don't know, try to have some like-minded people maybe in your community that you can talk to and say, this happened and I need to process this with my coworkers, but they're instantly, when I say race, they're taking it personal. It's not about taking anything personal. It's about, like Angela said, we're all learning, and I validate so much what Angela said, because we are all learning. And the Mary of my age today, which I'm not going to tell anyone, and the Mary of 20 years ago is a much more calmer and settled woman. But I could have been, you know, defined as kind of a peppery kind of lady with a very hot personality. But I think humility is so very much important, Bobby. And feel free if you want to reach out to me and if you want to chat one-on-one. Am I allowed to say that, Brenda?
I guess you can say what you want to say.
No, I'm just saying if people wanted more chat. Anyway, okay, I'll close it by saying I support Chris and Angela by saying that be humble and know that if the situations do happen, you do need support from the manager, and probably 90% of the managers will not look like you. So you will have an uphill battle, possibly, hopefully not. But knowing yourself that you do not deserve that treatment, and you deserve to live in a world where you are accepted one-on-one like everyone else walking along the street. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Chris?
Thank you, and I just want to thank that police officer, that first responder, for the job that he or she does, and you know, keep up the good work. And you know, my advice to her, and it's tough because you're in that environment, and for the most part, especially when you're new to the job, and you've been working with people who've been there for 10, 15, 20 years, and they have their own belief systems, they have their own way of doing things. And as a maybe a person just starting out, or sometimes you have to, because of the peer group, you have to conform. You have to conform to a belief system that maybe you don't believe in, to see things or do things that you don't believe in yourself. And it's tough, and it, you know, it brings conflict sometimes in a you know, in a person's life when you talk about ethics and professionalism. And sometimes, you know, not everybody's gonna believe in what you believe in. Everybody's not going to conform to I guess the standards or the beliefs that you know. And what do you do in a system like that? You know, especially if you're one individual. So I would advise that you know, just try to be you, be yourself. If that's something that you feel strongly, then you know, speak up. I would encourage you to do that as much as you can, and you know, just because I believe cultural education is important, and I think any profession, firefighters, first responders who are dealing with marginalized people, that they, you know, try to take that perspective check in, you know, in their workplace, and you know, put yourself in the other person's shoes. And because, you know, you're dealing with Indigenous people, you're dealing with African Canadians, you're dealing with many cultures in that type of field, you know, as a first responder. And you know, I always try to encourage to have an open heart and open mind, and you know, because I think understanding somebody else's culture is helping a person to bring diversity, you know, closer, you know, in a workplace. But on the same token, you know, do I want to be a troublemaker? Do I want to be the person who needs to speak up because I seen something wrong, something that I didn't feel comfortable with? And again, you know, you have to be prepared. If you're going to move forward with something, you have to be prepared to deal with potentially negative consequences within the system. And whether that system is police, government, private sector, businesses, whatever the case may be, there is still that chance that there might be some, you know, consequences to a complaint or whatever. But, you know, and back in the day, you know, if I had a problem with somebody, I would challenge them face to face. And I've always been like that. You know, potentially there might be, you know, some violence, just like Mary was saying, but, you know, I have calmed down over the last, I think, 15, 20 years. But I just like good communication to tell my story, to share my experiences, and you know, because I'm always, at one time in my life, I was always worried what other people thought about me. But now I'm at the point in my life, if you like me, you like me, and if you don't, you don't. I'm not going to, you know, lose any sleep over it. But I just try to promote. You know, I get comfortable sharing my thoughts and my beliefs with other people, and that's being assertive. And you know, that's something that and mindfulness too, it plays in. I think Angela mentioned the word mindfulness earlier. That is something, you know, being aware of what's going around you all the time, and being comfortable, and holding your head up high when you see those negative experiences, and being able to have a one-on-one conversation with somebody. Probably maybe behind closed doors, but for in the beginning. But and again, promote that goodness, promote that diversity, and promote that support, you know, in your workplace to the best of your ability all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Another question, and it kind of connects to what Angela was saying in the very beginning of this question. Can you please explain the difference between unconscious bias as opposed to racism? I feel that many get offended hearing the word racism, even if we know it is alive and well in our communities. And in light of what we are seeing in the United States, how that has given license to Canadians to become more emboldened to express hate. How do we effectively educate our communities to the difference of both terminologies? And also, who is responsible federally, provincially, and municipally to engage further in this dialogue and an education piece to go with it? Angela.
So I like to think of the difference between unconscious bias and overt race. Like, unconscious bias can be racism, but unconscious bias exists on various fields, about gender, about religion, about age, about one's ability or disability, or mental health. That, I mean, it's what we walk around with, all this underlying sort of baggage that gets programmed in us. We often hear it in terms of stereotyping. Our brain has just created these pathways of what expectations should be. So unconscious bias can show up and play out in a racist way. The allergy that we have to the word racism is because it feels like this personal affront in that we are actively deciding to discriminate. But really, there's this unconscious element to it, which is unconscious bias. A lot of what I have done in terms of unpacking unconscious bias is education. It's reading, it's talking to people, it's building relationships with people from diverse communities that aren't like mine. And it takes work. It's a lot of effort. And again, coming back to this idea of approaching, this path as a constant learning process, as an evolution. So that's sort of the first part of the question. Brenda, I didn't take
Yes, it is.
the second part of the question.
Well, really, I think the second part is, how do you effectively educate our communities to the difference between the two terminologies?
Yeah, and that's really hard. I think we're only in New Brunswick, very sadly, understanding that systemic racism exists. So I think there's this allergy right now, or this reaction that like, oh no, well, we're not racist. And it's sort of getting people to understand, well, if you look at how it's panning out, if you listen to what people are saying, there is racism here. So getting past that denial, and then having the next level of the conversation, which is the why. Why is it showing up in this way? Where can we see that there are failed processes, or a lack of diversity in our HR department, in our executive levels, in our operations team, in our management? Like, we need to start thinking more deeply about the root causes. So then we take the conversation from, okay, we acknowledge that there's systemic racism, then we unpack, okay, what are the biases that are programmed in here that are causing this? And I just want to loop back to what Chris and Mary were saying before. Policy isn't the be all and end all. If you don't have people who are going to be implemented in a proper way, if you don't have people who are diverse at a senior level in human resources, then what we're going to see is a higher likelihood that the policy, no matter how wonderfully it's been prepared and drafted, it not being adhered to. So it's really important that we dig deep and look at how, the biases show up within people implementing the policies as well, which is why I'm a really strong advocate for continued equity, diversity, and inclusion learning for all individuals.
Thank you, Angela. Mary?
I'm just trying to process the question, and I'd like to say what Angela said is ditto, ditto. But the unconscious bias is really something that is all part of us. We all have that. And as adults, we need to acknowledge that we're all on our own learning journey, and that a lot of our unconscious bias allows us to have privilege and benefits in terms of our education and the color of our skin. That gives us so much privilege. And I kind of support what Angela said about racism, because they're kind of, wrapped in between each other, like, two kind of spaghetti noodles, and you kind of can't have one without the other. But the unconscious bias is more spread out, as Angela said, with, gender, even with the people who have disabilities, education, I probably shouldn't bring this up, but even like in the Black community, there's the unconscious bias of the prejudgment of people with different levels of skin color. So, you know, within our own community, we fight that stigma of unconscious bias and, you know, and it's all because of colonialism. You know, we were raised to be the products of a dominant racist society. So our colonial fathers were obviously of a lighter skin color, and that's what everyone wanted to be, because then they'd be more like, you know, and this is very graphic, but like the master. So I'm getting off track, but I can't remember I get so distracted because all these questions are coming up on the panel, and I want to listen to my colleagues on the panel. So I'm gonna just move on to Chris.
Okay, thank you, Mary.
Thank you. You know, I think we, that unconscious bias, right? You know, is racism real? Does racism exist? You know, it's tough. It's just like, you know, for example, when you see a light in the sky at night, and you say, wow, that's a UFO. And, you know, is it real or is it ain't real? And, you know, this stuff exists. And I think we all have a responsibility to grab the bulls by the horn, to educate ourselves as much as we can, you know, from both perspectives, you know, from a marginalized perspective and in a white privileged perspective, to educate ourselves. And I think for the most part, whose responsibility is that? Is it the federal government, provincial government, whatever? And I don't think it's their responsibility per se. I think we all have a responsibility to do our best to educate ourselves, because as the old cliche goes, knowledge is power. And to understand, you know, what it is, how it works, and how it affects people. And if we can understand those points, we become enlightened, you know. And you know, when that happens to you, and I've seen people at one point, you know, I met people who, you know, have treated me differently, you know, when I first met them, because the color, when they found out I was a First Nation man, then their perspectives changed. But over time, you know, once they sort of got to know me and understand my perspective and where I'm coming from, change started to happen. And the only way that change is going to happen is through knowledge and education. Sharing your belief system with other people. And that's what we do here. Here at my home on St. Mary's First Nation, we have ceremonies here. And, you know, a lot of people that come here are non-Indigenous people, looking for the same thing that I'm looking for. That spiritual connection, you know, to the earth. And we don't discriminate here. You know, like I said earlier, the door is always open. And if you want to come and learn, you want to come and share, if you want to come and experience a culture, a tradition, a belief system that is very ancient, you know, please come. And you know, I take it upon myself to try to share my culture with as many people as I can on a daily basis. Right now, I have a group of high school students outside my area here waiting for me to come out and talk about the sweat lodge. So once I'm finished on this conversation here, I'm going to go out and share that knowledge. I'm going to share that I'm going to educate them in a culture that is that I'm very proud of. And I want to you know, thank everybody on the panel here today. And I want to thank all the people out there who are listening. And I hope that if you have experienced systemic racism in the education system, in your workplace, even, you know, anywhere, be that person of change and stand up and you know, let your voice be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So another question is, sometimes people don't acknowledge racism and they say, treat everyone the same regardless of color, ethnicity, ability, etc. Can you talk about the importance of acknowledging and respecting differences while ensuring everyone has an equal opportunity to participate? Who wants to start with that one? I kind of feel that we've been going in order. Maybe we want to shake up the order a little bit. Who wants to respond to that first?
I'll start. I'll go.
Okay.
And I mean, that is the dream, and that is the focus and the goal of healthy living, is respecting everyone you come in contact with and recognizing that individuals are simply that, individuals, two-legged beings that deserve respect and, you know, stand in line, get whatever. I mean, I guess in defense of the first part of the question, when you validate someone's existence, you don't always have to say, good morning, Mary, my Black Canadian friend. You know, it's good morning, Mary, and I hope you have a good day. And I think there's ways to validate our differences by not singling or othering us. And the challenge is, I think also, is to be confident in who you are as an individual, whether you're red, green, white, purple. And I'll also reflect on a bit of what Angela has said, is that if you are becoming aware, maybe there's a new employee and they're different, maybe they're disabled or they're LGBTQ, or maybe they're Black, whatever, or they're Indigenous. It's up to you to educate yourself. Please don't expect your new diverse colleague to come in and educate yourself, because that is not their role. Their role is to live their lives. So I think it's important, whatever spectrum we commit to, and we're defined, and again, it goes back to our unconscious bias, because everyone wears their own lens and defines who is what you're seeing. Like, I may see a woman and she looks like a Caucasian woman, but she may say, no, I'm Indigenous. So, you know, you validate, you let them tell you if they choose to tell you. So if you are encountering new co-workers and they are part of a diverse community, be it, you know, the ability or racialized or Indigenous, take some time to do your own education and reading. You know, I really, really want to validate what Angela had said, is that it is your responsibility as someone who does your own life and business to invest in your own learning by going to the library or talking to someone who you feel safe with and say, how can I learn more? Or, you know, so I'll just stand there, that in order to be respectful of diverse community, be respectful to them by learning and taking it upon yourself as an individual to do your own learning. Do not expect the other person to teach you.
Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
I'll jump in here, I guess.
Yep,
Thanks,
sure.
Mary, for shaking up the order. I just wanted to acknowledge also that Zoe made a comment in the conversation which taps into what you were talking about, Mary, in not relying on people of colour to be doing all this education. But, you know, that's what the purpose of this is, and I'm more than happy to share, and thank you everyone for being here and listening. In relation to the question, so it makes me think about the definition of systemic discrimination. So systemic discrimination beyond the cultural aspect can also be a rule or policy or procedure that is applied fairly to everyone, but it impacts people in a different way because of their membership or their characteristic on a certain ground. So if we were to use the example of religion, for example, and that may also intersect with people of colour, so race, what we observe in New Brunswick is based on a Christian calendar. We take days off for Easter and Christmas, but not everyone adheres to those holidays. People might celebrate Eid, they might celebrate Hanukkah, they may need to take other days off. That looks like a fair rule. It looks like it's consistent across everyone, but the impact on individuals is very different when they practice a different religion. They're going to have to take their own days off. They may be going without pay to be able to observe their own religious holiday. So it's not enough to say that we can treat everybody equally. We need to be treating people equitably. And that's the important distinction. And it's something that in the Human Rights Act, we see built into the concept of the duty to accommodate. So that's the obligation where employers have the duty to provide a reasonable accommodation up to the point of undue hardship. And I'd refer people to the New Brunswick Human Rights Commission for information about that. But what it speaks to is if you have an employee who has a membership, who has a characteristic to a ground, and there are 16 grounds in the Human Rights Act, that employers in most circumstances should be, in a lot of circumstances, should be accommodating or providing a reasonable accommodation, an alternative for that person. So that's not equal treatment, right? We're not saying that everybody therefore gets a day off for Eid or 3 days off for Eid, or everybody gets to have days off for Hanukkah. That's not how it works. It means that recognizing people as being different, we're going to tailor our approach, and we're going to make sure that they are given an opportunity really to engage in an inclusive environment. So that's what I like to think about in terms of systemic discrimination, and how that sort of shows the difference between equity and equality. With race as a ground, like that may show up in different ways. And it's just important that you engage with where there is intersectionality, with other areas like religion, but also more race-specific concerns that may exist. So yeah, that's my thought.
Thank you, Angela. Chris?
Thank you again. You know, just thinking about, I'm gonna provide an example, right? First Nation people don't pay taxes. So a lot of people might get upset about that, but there is sort of rules behind it, sort of thing, right? So, for example, when I worked for the federal government, I had to pay, even though I was Indigenous, I had to pay taxes on my salary because I was working outside of my community at the time. So a lot of people just assume that. A lot of people just think that because an Indigenous person doesn't have to pay taxes, right? And because of that, you know, might start to say, well, how come this group doesn't have to pay taxes and I do? And that's when that negative thinking, those biases, even hatred, you know, comes into play. You know, why are other groups being treated differently, right? And to educate, you know, people on that, because people just assume things without really fully understanding the circumstances behind it. And that's where that education piece comes into play, you know, and sharing, you know, maybe sometimes telling people that's, you might believe that, you might think that, but that's not true. And, you know, I had a lot of difficulties over the years, you know, especially working in the federal government, you know, asking, you know, if I pay taxes on my salary, sort of thing, right? Now, why do Indigenous people get free education, right? Yes, that, and that's true too. You know, Indigenous people, you know, if they choose to do so, have that education paid for. That education is paid for by the federal government, right? And that's where that sort of hatred comes in. And well, that's my taxpayers' dollars going towards you know, First Nation people, right? And then, you know, our young people are still suffering today because a lot of our young kids don't have the opportunity for whatever reason to finish school. And, you know, that opportunity of education is there for everyone who chooses to make that choice to further their education. But for the most part, you know, those misconceptions, those, you know, not understanding a perspective on things and just making assumptions, you know, because of what you see on the media, what you see on social media, what may be passed down to you from another person, you know, and being, you know, in today's world, I think for the most part, you know, we have to learn to get along with one another. And I know for some people that, you know, they you know, they like to, you know, see other people suffer for whatever reason. And I believe that a friend of mine told me one time, we're one race, we're the human race. And that's the way you know, that's the way I go out and deliver that message to the best of my ability every day, is to share, to teach, you know, and to tell stories, because that communication, I think, has to happen, you know, on a one-to-one basis. You know, I do a lot of cultural sensitivity training. One of the biggest things, tools that I use, or teachings that I use, is the Kairos blanket exercise. There might be some people out there who might be familiar with that teaching of the blanket exercise, and it's an interactive, historical, very powerful exercise that we go out there and just to educate people on our history, on our culture, and some of the things that have happened to our people, you know, ever since first contact. And, you know, will racism ever end? I think we have to, you know, sit down. Is it always going to be there? Is it ever going to stop? Right? And that's a question I want to put out there for all the people that are listening. And how can we do that? How can we work together to end racism? You know, especially in today's society, where we see all that negativity on the news, you know, in regards to, you know, Black Lives Matter, Red Lives Matter, enough is enough, you know, all these different, you know, things that are going out there in the world today, you know, and you know, we're at one point, I think, where, you know, you're going to have to choose for yourself, you know, in regards, because it's all about choices. It's all about, you know, what is right, what is wrong. You know, there's a lot of pain and suffering in this world, unfortunately, and you know, a lot of people don't like each other because of color of their skin, their religion, their sexual orientation, many different reasons out there. And it's you know, it's very frustrating sometimes, you know, to see that still goes on in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you. There's going to be far too many questions for me to be able to take them in order, so I'm just going to skip around. This is a question about white privilege, and it's been mentioned a few times during this conversation. I have heard white privilege noted a couple of times. I would love to hear each of your definitions. of this. I understand this to be simply having the privilege of not being judged by the color of my skin every day. So when we talk about white privilege, or when the word said, what is your definition of it? And Mary wants to go first.
Yeah, that middle child syndrome, eh? Gotta get my foot in there. Yeah, that's a complicated, I use the term a lot, but really to unpack it, it's very difficult to put into words. But basically, I mean, we've all heard about Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking My Invisible Backpack. I suggest anyone who is struggling with white privilege or trying to understand it to look that up. You can probably just Google that, Peggy McIntosh, Unpacking My Invisible Backpack. So there is some privilege because the white race historically has been the dominant race. And with the dominant race comes the privilege of being the CEO, setting up the government, setting up the institutions, setting up the communities, like right down to the municipalities. I mean, so the privilege, I can't remember Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking, but I mean, even the privilege of having a door opened for you. That's privilege. I've been in line. I remember years ago, probably in the 80s, I was at a garage on Woodstock Road here in Fredericton, and there was a white man, a lovely man, and myself, and then another white man. And so the cashier went to the man in front of me, of course, and then she skipped me and went to the guy behind me. Like there were three of us, and the guy behind me said, "What are you doing? This lady was here before me." So not being seen is kind of the opposite of white privilege. When you're recognized and validated every day, that is something that a lot of non-white people do not get, and it depends on the unconscious bias of the person who has the perceived power at that time. So, again, I'm going to stop there, and I'll let my colleagues take over. So that's an example of white privilege. I apologize if I am kind of mumbling.
Thank you very much, Mary. You're very clear. Angela?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question because we're all trying to get to the nut of what is white privilege, right? Like through all our learnings through this year, the world has gone on this group sort of educational exercise. Echo what Mary is saying about this wonderful tool that, thank you, multiple people have circulated from Peggy McIntosh, and it's on the chat, so have a look at that. For me, my initial understanding of white privilege was being able to walk around and not look different. That was my sort of kindergarten level of my lunch looks different from everybody else. My skin looks different from everyone else. I was like, oh, okay. So there was a sense of what is normal, which is an awful, way to conceptualize it, but that's how it was sort of imbued in me when I was 5. And now I'm seeing white privilege play out in a lot of different ways. Seeing it as in terms of, once again, the dominant race through history, that impacts how white people have had a system and structure that supports them. A history that is not filled with trauma, that is carried intergenerationally. And I think the other thing in talking about white privilege, which I find really interesting, is that when you suggest to, I found that when I've suggested to a white person that they carry privilege, particularly people in lower socioeconomic groups or who belong to another marginalized community, they find it really difficult to acknowledge that there is some privilege that is associated with the color of their skin or their generational background. Because what they're thinking about is that their own oppression and their own lack of privilege in different areas. So I always like to think about white privilege as being correlated to other types of privilege that may exist. For example, financial, family, socioeconomic, whatever, education, whatever, health outcomes, whatever it may be. There's that correlation that we see on a societal level. It may not pan out for people one-on-one in terms of their own personal experience, but that doesn't mean that they don't experience that element or some level of that privilege in their own life. And I recognize that, you know, as a person of color, I experience privilege in other areas. So whilst I might not be racialized, my experience is that, for example, with unconscious bias, it flips both ways, right? There's an assumption that I'm fantastic at maths and that I should be doing the accounting or splitting bills all the time, you know, and that's, you know, to bring a bit of levity to this discussion, like that's some of the ways that it plays out. There's a level of assumption that I have reached a certain level of education, and that I might, that my privilege or looks different on different axes. But that's not to say that, you know, there is oppression or there is a lack of privilege on a different axis. So that's the wonder of this, this tool that's been shared. It's unpacking those various elements that sit under white privilege on a more societal level.
Thank you, Angela. Chris? Chris? Oh, I think he's muted.
I actually think maybe he's frozen.
I think so too, actually.
Oh, there he is.
Sorry about that. I'm getting calls for assistance here. White privilege, that's what we're talking about, right?
Yes.
Okay. You know, when I think of the word privilege, I always think about a driver's license. Driving is a privilege, not a right. So it's something that, you know, it's obviously, you know, can be sort of taken away from me, sort of, you know, if I don't conform or follow the rules, sort of thing, right? So I think it's important to understand that, you know, we all have privileges, right? Even marginalized groups have privileges, sort of thing, right? And you know, to live in a world that sometimes can be where that negative condescent comes into play. And you know, I understand that that power control, you know, is you know, is out there. And then, you know, and who has that power and control, right? You know, and that's the question, you know, I want to put out there. You know, with that power and control, you know, and that's where that, I think sometimes that's, you know, for the most part, that's where that racism starts, because of that power and control. And, you know, it's always been, you know, something that's been happening for all over the world, you know, for centuries, you know, in regards to power and control. So I like to, you know, just to emphasize, you know, from my perspective, that I consider myself a privileged person, right? And I say that because I give thanks. I give thanks for the things that I have every day, the air that I breathe, the water that I drink, the people in my life, and those are privileges, you know. And if I don't take care of those things, if I don't you know, look after those things can be taken away. So a lot of people take things for granted in their lives every day, you know, and for the most part, you know, I give thanks every day for the things that I have, you know, especially, you know, my culture, my language, my ceremonies, my family, my community, my people, you know, and I consider those privileges. I really, really do. And those are things that, you know, that are important to me, sort of thing, right? So, you know, if you know, we're not pointing fingers at anybody. You know, when you use that term, white privilege, you know, you got to understand, you know, exactly what it is, and you know how it's in context. You know, with the workplace and everything that goes on around you. But you know, for the most part, you know, I understand it, and I'm mindful of it. You know, when I go into you know, especially, you know, working with the federal government all those years, you know, that term was always in the back of my mind, white privilege, right? And I'm working in a place that is not controlled by minorities, but it's controlled by the majority that has all the power and control. And you know, looking back at things, you know, being the you know, when I first compared to when I first started my career in the federal public service, and then when I finished my career in the federal public service, you know, that change was there. That change was slow in the beginning, you know, and when I talk about change, I talk about education. I talk about cultural sensitivity training. I talk about more hiring of minorities, you know, in the federal public service. So those steps, you know, are things that are positive, but you know, that inclusive type of an environment that I worked in there at one time, at one point, you know, because I remember, and this is a funny story. I remember one time when I first walked into that maximum security environment in a federal prison, and there was a correctional officer there, and I walked into a sort of like it's a control bubble, so everything was in a sort of contained area. So I rang the buzzer, and I said, "I'm here to report for duty." I said, "The supervisor sent me down here." So he came up, opened the door. So I went back downstairs where he was, and he said, "Young fella," he says, "you don't talk to me, and I don't talk to you." And he says, "Don't be pushing any buttons," he says. So for the whole 4 hours I was there, he never said one thing to me. And but over time, you know, like I said earlier, once he sort of got to know me, and once I got to know him, we became good friends. But at that point, and that one point in that time, you know, he didn't know who I was. I didn't know where he was, where he was coming from. But over time, that connection, because we were involved, you know, with incidents, you know, especially in that type of work, police work, you're going to depend on your partner, no matter who he is, if he's black, white, red, or yellow, to be there to support you and watch your back, and especially when there's situations going on. And that's how our friendship developed in regards to you know, understanding one another, sort of thing, right? And I never looked at him as being a person of white privilege. I looked at him as a white man who just needed some education, I guess, and I had the opportunity to share a lot of good times with him. He's in the spirit world now, and I'm glad that I had that opportunity when I first met him to have that sort of, I guess, negative experience with him. But over time, we became good friends, and I just want to acknowledge him too. And I just want to say that I miss him, and I wish he was here, you know, listen to me telling the story about him today, sort of thing, right? So thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Well, if you can believe it or not, 90 minutes is flowing right by. Before we go, I do want to say that there will be a poll that we'll post, and we would like everybody to give us feedback on that, if you wouldn't mind, so that we know maybe what to do better next time. I would really, really like to thank the panelists. It's amazing. You have been absolutely amazing. You have shared your personal experiences from the heart. You've shared your professional experiences. You have given us so much today. You've been awesome. Just absolutely awesome. And I thank you so much. And I know that there's been many remarks about how wonderful this panel has been and how wonderful it has been that you have shared your personal experiences, because that's not always so easy. So thank you very much. Would you like to have a last word, each one of you, maybe, before we sign off?
Again, I'll start.
Okay, Mary.
I mean, I worked many years for the provincial government. I ended my working career like as a counselor with PEDAL, employment counselor. And I felt really bogged down being part of an institutionalized governmental bureaucracy. So I always felt I could do my best when I shut my office door and I met one-on-one with my clients, which would be the individuals from New Brunswick seeking assistance. So I guess I want to say to everyone to just validate yourself in what you do if you're working within institutions that can sometimes oppress and defeat you. I was kind of a rule breaker. I don't know if any of my coworkers are still on, or my manager. I just, not saying that you should be what I did, but I'm just saying that you can effect change with everyone that sits in front of you. So in terms of the topic, which is systemic racism in the workplace, keep your mind open, try to be an informed New Brunswick employee. I can't let my personal biases come through because I was not a very good bureaucrat, like a person that worked within the system. I worked for the clients in front of me. So I'll just close by saying thank you for inviting me. I hope that everyone has learned lots, or if you have questions, send them to Nicole or however you want to do this. And I appreciate being invited to talk about such a very, very, very precious and meaningful topic to me. Something that with the Black Lives Matter movement, I say to everyone, I'm living my Black life every day, every moment. So I appreciate the awareness that the Nicole's group and the Oromocto-Ferguson and all the other partners have given us this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. Angela?
Okay, I'll go. I'll
Chris
go
is going next. Good. Okay.
I'm going to have to leave here pretty soon. Sort of thing,
Okay.
So, yeah, I'd just like to say, Williwan, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share here today. And I want to leave with a couple things. First, I want to say, bleed a hump skill. So that means be proud of who you are. If you're red, white, black, or yellow, be proud of who you are. And I also want to leave with the word change. So take that word, interpret it, understand it, and know that you as an individual, for the people out there listening, have the ability to make that change. So I'm gonna, again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share here today. I know I was filling in on the last minute for another person who was supposed to be here. And I said, I'll take your place, but you're gonna have to buy me a Tim Hortons coffee. So thank you everyone. Guzalmo Popa, I love you all. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Chris. And last word to you, Angela.
Mary and Chris have said it all. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us. Thank you very much for organizing this. Brenda, thank you for facilitating the discussion. And Nicole, thank you so much for keeping us all on track as well. This has been wonderful. I hope everyone is able to walk away with something else to think about, something else in their toolkit, and a renewed commitment to do more reading and learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela. And I'm sure everybody will walk away with a new understanding of systemic racism in the workplace and other places as well, because systemic racism is everywhere, not just in the workplace, unfortunately. And I'm sure that everyone will walk away with all kinds of interest in exploring new knowledge and education. So thank you very much for giving your time today and for your personal experiences. I know that everything that you've all said has come from your hearts and from your personal experiences. And so thank you very much. I appreciate it very much.